What's going on, guys? Zuko back with another Last Epoch video. Hope you're all doing super well. I wanted to do a quick video on damage over time for you guys, talking about how to scale it, what to look for on gear, how to actually make your damage over time builds really concrete and actually get the job done in the late game, because I think it's a difficult thing to understand. Sometimes you'd be equipping gear and you're like, this should definitely buff my damage, and then it doesn't. So let's do a quick guide on damage over time. I want to start by just talking about the different types of damage over time. So every single damage type in this game, which is represented right here, more or less, they all have damage over time components. So for fire, obviously, it's ignite. Lightning has what's called electrify. Cold is frostbite. Physical is bleed. Poison is poison. Necrotic is damned. And then void has got time rot. And there's another one called Doom, which is kind of a melee one. But really, Time Rot is the main for Void. So if we just look really quickly, I want to distinguish between the different damage over time elements, because they really do matter. So if you look it up in the game guide, which, again, you just press G to open your game guide, you can see each damage over time and what it does. So some of the damage over times do high amounts of base damage over time, but don't have any additional debuffs on them. Some have a lower base damage, but apply debuffs, additional debuffs, like freezing or stunning, or that kind of thing. So Ignite, for example, does damage over time, and it deals 40 damage over 2.5 second duration. Now, you can increase the damage of this. Is just a base number. So when you get increases to your Ignite damage, it's starting with the 40 damage number, and you're boosting it from there. That's how it works, okay? So that's Ignite. If we look at, like, Electrify, for example, it also does damage over time. It does 44 damage over time over 2.5 seconds. Then if we move to Frostbite, this is the cold damage over time. It's a lot longer because it deals 36 damage over 3 seconds, so less damage over time and a longer duration by 0.5 seconds. But it also has a chance to increase the enemies, increases their chance to be frozen. So it actually has that additional bonus of getting the freeze going on, which is a very powerful CC, and you can apply it to bosses as well. So it does a little bit less damage over time, but does have that additional bonus that you're looking for there. Those are the first four, right? What are we looking at? Then we're at Physical. Physical obviously is just for, we're looking at Bleed. Bleed just does damage. It doesn't have any extra debuff, but it does, I think the highest base damage over time in the game is Bleed at 53. And then we've got Poison, which ends up also shredding the poison resistance. So it deals poison damage over time and shreds the resistance. That is a huge difference there. It can only stack, it can stack an unlimited number of times, but only the first 30 stacks reduce the poison resistance. So it does very low base damage. Like we had like 44, 53. This is 28, but it's going to gain extra damage because it's shredding poison resist, right? So it starts like lower on the totem pole, but it will gradually work its way up because you're shredding those resistances, whereas Ignite doesn't shred, right? So that's important to understand. And then when we look at Damn, this is the necrotic damage over time. It has an additional function as well. It reduces health regeneration. So lower base damage, but it reduces health regen by 20%. And then if we look at Time Rot, that's the final one. This does actually pretty high void damage, and then also increases the stun duration on enemies. So not a crazy debuff, but for Void Knight, it's actually very powerful. So that's all the different damage over times and what they do. I just wanted to make you aware that every single one of these elements has its own damage over time, and they do vary a little bit in terms of their base damages and kind of what they, how much damage they can do over time, or the debuffs they're putting on enemies. So let's talk about how to scale these because this is the most important thing to understand. First of all, there are a bunch of modifiers that can scale damage over time. The very first one is going to be damage over time. Okay, if you get something on there that has damage over time, it's going to buff any any dot build that you're doing at all. If you get damage over time, it will buff it. It'll buff Ignite, Bleed, Electrify, any of them. This covers it, okay? And then elemental damage over time is another one. That's, of course, only applying to fire, cold, and lightning. Okay, the electrify one. Those are very important. And then you will have specific ones like fire damage over time, or physical damage over time, or poison damage over time that can also apply. That's also, of course, going to buff your damage over time with that specific element. There's also damages like increased damage. So if we just look at increased damage, I guess that doesn't really show up on crafting. But if we look at this here, for example, I've got 73% increased fire damage, okay? That is going to buff my damage over time. It's also going to buff my hits. Anything that hits is going to be buffed by that. It's a generic buff to everything, but it does also include my ignite damage, okay? So if you're trying to build an ignite build, for example, you would want to stack modifiers like damage over time or just percentage increased fire damage. That is going to help you with damage over time. The spell damage here on my implicit does not buff it at all, okay? It's not a spell, it's an ignite. That's a different thing. And then, of course, like melee damage is not going to buff it. Any flat kind of increases to melee damage, those are not going to buff it at all, okay? We'll keep going with what will buff it, though. If you get more damage, like 30% more fire damage, would also buff your damage over time, your ignite damage, okay? And then we're going to get into some of the specifics. So your chance to apply an ailment is another way to massively buff your damage. This game, Last Epoch, is different than a game like Path of Exile, for example. Let me try and find the arena here. In Path of Exile, you basically get 100% ignite chance, and then that's all you can actually get. If you get more than 100% ignite chance, it doesn't matter. It's actually irrelevant. In this game, if you have more than 100% ignite chance or bleed chance or poison chance, it will add an additional stack to the enemy, okay? Very important. So when you hit an enemy, you can do multiple stacking, and I'm going to show you that on the dummies right now. Right, so if we're at the dummies here, you can see the bar at the top of your screen. If I hit these guys, it's going to start adding stacks of ignite. These are the stacks here, and they're each going to do damage individually, right? Which is the best part about this is that the more chance you have to ignite, the more stacks that you add per hit. You can see I'm adding 3 stacks of ignite just by hitting once. So if I keep hitting, I'm getting 3, 6, 9, 12. You know, it adds up really, really quickly, and then the ignite gets out of control. They just start bleeding like crazy fast, okay? So, or not bleeding, but burning in my case. So, in other games like Path of Exile, like I said, having 100% ignite chance, it doesn't really matter beyond that. In this game, it is a way to scale your damage. Getting more ignite chance is a way to scale your damage. So here on Calamity, I have 150% chance to ignite with fire skills. My baseline chance to ignite is 59%. But Calamity, it's not counting Calamity. I don't know why, but it's not. I guess it's because it's only for fire skills. So technically right now I have a 200% chance to ignite on hit. And then if we look at Cinder Strike itself, I actually have another 100% chance to ignite on Cinder Strike. So that's why every time I hit, I have a 300% chance I'm getting 3 stacks of ignite. This is a way to scale your damage, okay? This is exactly how you want to scale your damage. On top of getting, obviously, percent damage, damage over time, plus to fire damage or poison damage, whatever you're doing, this is a great way to scale it. Adding as many dots as possible per hit is a huge DPS gain for damage over time builds, okay? So make sure you're getting your chance to ignite or chance to poison or chance to bleed as high as you possibly can, and you will maximize your damage that way. The last thing is going to be increased ailment duration, and then there's other interesting ways to scale with like stats, but increased ailment duration is a good one. There's very, very few basically bases in the game or even items in the game that do this. There's one right here example for Time Rod. So this increases Time Rod duration. These atrophy gloves, that's at the Time Rod dot the void damage over time. That's going to increase its duration, which increases its damage. This axe here, the base implicit has chance to bleed and then increase bleed duration. Increasing the duration of an ailment is a very rare stat in this game. So it's not something that I'm not saying don't go find it, but like you're much more likely to find like chance to ignite or chance to poison or just, you know, percent increased damage. That's going to be a lot easier to find. Like right here, percent fire damage, right? 269% increased fire damage. That would be pretty great for my fire damage over time build, but obviously the weapon is not good for my build. But you see what I'm saying there. So this is not a stat that I would go chasing down. Increased duration is in the game. It's very rare. That's the bottom line. I want to say that. Now, there's some interesting ways that you can also scale your damage, for example, with your stats. So I have a modifier on Cinder Strike that says it deals increased fire damage over time per point of dexterity. And there are several different skills in the game that can apply dots to enemies that will scale with different modifiers other than percent damage or getting more stacks on the enemy, all the stuff that we talked about. So this is one of those really unique ways, and this dramatically scales my damage over time. This is like my entire build on this character revolves around this right here, because it gives me 6% more fire damage over time per point of dexterity. I have 71. Let's call it 70. 7 times 6 is 42. That's 420% more ignite damage from Cinder Strike. So I have to obviously be hitting the enemies with Cinder Strike, but if I do, I'm going to be applying 3 stacks of Ignite, and each of those Ignites is going to do 420% more damage than whatever the base is. So right here we can see the base is 40, and then you can look at your other base damage over time multiplier right here. So my poison damage over time is 46 right now. My Ignite damage over time is 228 right now. That is not including the Cinder Strike hit. So my Cinder Strike hit takes the 228 and multiplies it by 420%. So basically times 4. So it's doing almost 1,000 damage per Ignite that I put on the enemy. And I'm putting 3 Ignites per hit. Do you see where the scaling gets really crazy there? That's why when I'm starting to hit these guys, it's doing thousands of damage per second, because we have so many Ignites going. There's so many Ignites. 26, you can see it going down there as we lose stacks. But that's how that works. That's how you can scale your damage. This is just one way to do it on Cinder Strike with the dexterity scaling, but there's other ways to do it with other skills. But I just want you to be aware that you need to look out for these kinds of modifiers, okay? So you can get damage over time. You can get percent damage over time. You can get more damage, which is pretty rare. You can get an increase to the duration of the ailment that you have, okay? I think more prominent for like some of the Warlock stuff you can do over there. And then if you increase your chance to apply an ailment, that is a big way to do it, right? Multiple stacks stacking up at the same time is going to dramatically increase your damage. Then you can, of course, get these strange different modifiers, like getting it to scale off of your dexterity. There's some that scale off of like attunement. There's different stats that you can use to scale different damage over time. And then, of course, you're looking for items that are going to do it for you. This item here gives me my Ignite chance is almost all wrapped up in Calamity here. I have 15 dexterity on my shield, which is going to scale my damage over time. See how that kind of works there? I have this ring. This gives me another chance to Ignite. So I have 50% here, another 50%. That's 200% chance to Ignite just with these 2 items. And then 63% increased fire damage over time. Yes, the spell stuff, it doesn't matter, but the other stats on this are so incredibly strong that it's worth me wearing this, okay? And then, of course, you can get plus to your skills. So I have +3 to Cinder Strike, and within my Cinder Strike, that means I can put more points into, the fire damage over time, more points into my Ignite. Whatever skill you're using, look to see on that skill, if you get plus to the skill, where can you add more damage over time? Because a lot of the skills in this game that can do damage over time are very, very good at doing it if you can put those extra skill points in. So that will help you out as well, okay? Those are the main ways, guys, that you want to scale your damage over time. What you do not want to ever get on your gear is flat damage, okay? So, for example, right here, this is +8 bow physical damage. And then the +48 bow damage implicit does not help you at all. This is not helping your damage over time, okay? It doesn't do anything for damage over time. So, again, you want to be looking for not these kinds of modifiers. Do not look for flat damage. That's a really, really terrible one. Plus to melee damage also will not help you. So plus, even if it was giving me +36 like melee fire damage, that would not help my Ignite. Melee physical damage would not help a bleed because it's melee, okay? It does not apply to damage over time. Critical strikes do nothing for damage over time. You cannot crit with damage over time, so do not get crit on any build that's using damage over time either, okay? Very, very important to understand that. So I hope that helps some of you guys understand a little bit more about how to scale your dot builds. If you have any more questions for me, please drop them down below in the comments. If you want to send me like a picture of something that you're not sure about in game, drop it in the Discord. We have a channel in the Discord for Last Epoch, so come jump in and try that out and show me what's going on, and I can answer your questions there as well. Okay, guys? So there you go. That's it for damage over time. Go scale your damage. It's going to be really strong for you. One last thing I just do want to mention is penetration. I forgot about that. If you have something that is giving you fire pen or, cold pen or shocking an enemy, which reduces their resistances, or if you're looking at Poison Pen, that all applies to damage over time. I'm not sure if I mentioned that in the beginning of that video, but it does also apply to damage over time. So any kind of shredding you can do on enemy resistances, those are very good. Okay? That's it for me, guys. Thanks so much again for watching. Love you all. I will see you in the next one.